Good day to all. Today I will tell you the story of Jacob Stone, a man whose legendary status in the world of crime has firmly established him as one of the most dangerous criminals in America. This man created one of the most powerful gangs operating across the country, and his name became synonymous with power, wealth, and ruthlessness. But what kind of person was this mysterious criminal? How did he manage to evade the law for so long and remain in the criminal world, always at the top? This is the story of his greatness, his fear and courage, his dark deeds and hidden ambitions. Prepare to be plunged into a world of intrigue, danger, and unexpected turns of events, because his story will capture your attention from the very first moments. Jacob was born and raised in a devastated area of a large American city. His parents, Michael and Sarah, struggled to survive, working several low-paying jobs. Living in poverty and social isolation made him a silent and withdrawn child who spent most of his time alone. The first steps on the path to crime. From a very young age, Jacob witnessed crime and violence on the streets of his neighborhood. He was often bullied by his peers and felt unwanted. Looking for a way to make money and gain respect, he joined a local gang where he quickly gained a reputation as a desperate and determined guy. Jacob Smith was a black boy, which only increased his sense of isolation in a neighborhood where prejudice and racial animosity were prevalent. His parents also suffered from racism, constantly facing hostility and discrimination at work and in society. However, Jacob was a determined and intelligent child. He strived for a better life for himself and his family, despite all the obstacles. At school, he was the target of ridicule and threats because of his skin, but he didn't let it get him down. Instead, it became the impetus for him to strive to prove his worth and strength to everyone. His parents always supported him and motivated him to learn and develop despite difficulties. It was through this support and his own willpower that Jacob was able to overcome the negative influences of his environment and strive for his dreams. Influenced by his childhood and struggles with prejudice and untruths, Jacob decided that becoming an outlaw was the only way to protect himself and his family, and to prove his strength and power in a world where racism and crime reign on the streets. When Jacob was 13 years old, his family decided to try their luck and move to Philadelphia. It was a big step for them, but they hoped the new city would bring them more opportunity and hope. Philadelphia turned out to be like a new beginning for Jacob and his family. They settled into the new area, and Jacob went to a new school. The new city brought them some relief from the racial tensions they had previously experienced, but some challenges still remained. For Jacob, moving to Philadelphia meant new opportunities, but also new dangers. He was ready to use his skills and strength in his new city to give himself and his family a better future. But he was also determined to prove to everyone that he was not just a black boy from the ghetto, but a man capable of achieving more in life. In Philadelphia, Jacob and his family faced new challenges, but they continued to be haunted by issues related to their race. Even in a new city, they often faced discrimination and prejudice. For Jacob, this became an additional incentive to become stronger and more influential. He began looking for ways to earn money and influence to protect his family and prove his worth in society. However, moving to a new city also gave Jacob new opportunities. He began to become acquainted with local gangs and groups that controlled the streets of Philadelphia. With his intelligence and charisma, he quickly gained respect and trust in this world of crime. For Jacob, Philadelphia became not only a new home, but also a platform for his ambitions. He sought power and respect, preparing himself to become one of the most powerful and dangerous criminals in the city. When Jacob was 16 years old, his father, Michael, was killed in a random attack on the streets of Philadelphia. This happened on one of the cold autumn evenings, when Michael was returning from work late in the evening. He accidentally witnessed a robbery in one of the dark alleys of the city. Michael, without hesitation, decided to intervene and try to help the victim of the attack. He tried to calm down the attackers and invited them to give money to save the life of an innocent person. But in response to his kindness, one of the attackers shot Michael without hesitation and fled the scene of the crime. This tragic death shook Jacob and his family to the core. They lost the main breadwinner of the family and the person who had always been their support. The death of his father only strengthened Jacob's sense of powerlessness and hatred of a world ruled by violence and lawlessness. This tragic incident became a turning point in Jacob's life. He decided that he would no longer be powerless and vulnerable. He promised himself that he would find and take revenge on those who killed his father, and that he would become strong and powerful to protect his family and achieve his goals in this cruel world. After his father's death, Jacob was overcome with deep grief and rage. He vowed to find the killers and take revenge on them for the death of his father. But his grief was only the beginning of the difficult trials that he had to go through. The death of the father left the family without the main breadwinner. Jacob now has the responsibility of providing for his family and protecting his mother, Sarah. He decided to take on this burden and become a support for his family. As Jacob grew older, he became increasingly immersed in the world of crime in Philadelphia. He joined a local gang and began making money doing illegal things. In this cruel world, he learned that to survive, he must be strong, cunning, and ruthless. However, his desire for revenge for his father's death never went away. Jacob used all his resources and connections to find the killers. He spent a lot of time and effort on this, while not forgetting about his family and his responsibilities in the world of crime. Thus, the death of his father became the impetus for Jacob to plunge deeply into the criminal world, but the source of his motivation and determination to achieve justice. Jacob continued his life in the world of crime, balancing between the responsibilities of protecting his family and seeking revenge for the death of his father. He quickly gained a reputation as a strong and influential man in the local gang, thanks to his determination and ability to make quick and decisive decisions. In his quest to find his father's killers, Jacob used every resource available to him. He infiltrated underground networks and even infiltrated rival gang territories, searching for any information that could lead him to answers. At the same time, he continued to earn money and respect in the criminal world using his skills and knowledge. But the deeper he delved into the world of crime, the more he realized that the truth was not always as simple as he thought. He faced betrayal, corruption, and complex moral dilemmas that forced him to question his path and his goals. As he continued his quest, Jacob couldn't help but wonder how far he was willing to go to avenge his father. He realized that this could change him forever, and that the price of revenge could be high, both for himself and for his family. But his determination to find the truth and achieve justice remained unchanged, filling him with strength and motivation in this dangerous world. Upon reaching the age of 18, Jacob became even more ambitious and determined. His desire for revenge and desire to gain influence led him to the decision to join one of the most dangerous and influential gangs in the city. He attracted the attention of the leaders of this gang with his skills, determination, and ability to make quick and correct decisions. By his actions, he proved that he is worthy to join their ranks and become part of this powerful organization. By joining the gang, Jacob gained access to new resources, connections, and opportunities. He quickly moved up within the gang hierarchy, earning the trust and respect of his fellow criminals. However, joining this gang meant that Jacob had to make some hard compromises and take some risks. He became part of a world where the laws of force and violence ruled, and where every decision could have serious consequences. Despite the dangers and difficulties, joining this gang gave Jacob even more opportunities to realize his plans to avenge his father and achieve his goals in the world of crime. He was ready to do anything to achieve his goal and protect his family from any threat. After joining a dangerous gang, Jacob became a pawnbroker, a role that required him to carry and distribute drugs. It was dirty and dangerous work, but he accepted it, seeing it as an opportunity to advance within the gang and gain access to valuable information. Jacob quickly acquired the skills and intelligence needed to complete his tasks. He was careful and resourceful, avoiding the attention of the police and rival gangs. His success in this role only enhanced his status within the gang, as well as his reputation as a reliable and effective operative. However, with each new assignment, Jacob plunged deeper and deeper into the dark and dangerous sides of the criminal world. He saw how drugs destroyed people's lives, how power and lust for power divided gangs, and how blood and violence became an integral part of his daily life. However, Jacob remained true to his goal, to find his father's killers and take revenge on them. Every time he carried drugs or performed other tasks, he remembered his revenge and that this work brought him closer to his goal. Thus, Jacob continued his path in the world of crime, balancing his responsibilities in the gang with his desire for revenge for the death of his father. His life became more and more dangerous and difficult, but he was ready to go through all obstacles to achieve his goal. Jacob, continuing his investigations, came across information that the clue to his father was in the old files of the police station. He decided to take a chance and enter the abandoned building where these files were kept. In the darkness of an empty building, Jacob discovered an ancient archive filled with dusty files and old notes. While looking through them, he found a file regarding his father's murder. The name mentioned in the dossier was Johnson. It was his father's name. But besides this, the documents mentioned the name of one of the witnesses, who would clearly be the key to the solution. After studying the file in detail, Jacob realized that the witness was hiding, fearing for his life. However, his location was indicated in one of the notes. It was an old address where he lived many years ago. Jacob decided to go there to find this witness and find out the truth about his father's death. This was his last chance for justice, and he was ready to go to the end to find out the truth and avenge his father's death. Under the cover of night, Jacob headed to the witness's old address. It was a run-down area where the streets were deserted and the houses looked abandoned and forgotten. He approached an ancient house, shrouded in darkness and mystery. Stepping inside, Jacob carefully inspected every corner, preparing for any possibility. The dusty furniture and box-filled rooms seemed forgotten by time. In one of the rooms, he found an old man sitting in the corner, frozen in fear. Once in front of him, Jacob asked questions about his father's death. The man was scared and cautious in his answers, but gradually he began to tell Jacob what he knew. It turned out that his father was involved in matters that could lead to death, and that his murder was part of a shady deal. Jacob learned the name of the man who ordered the murder, and with the help of a witness, gathered enough information to press charges. But before he could do anything further, he had to deal with his feelings and decide how to proceed. At that moment, Jacob realized that the truth about his father's death was much more complex than he had imagined. He had to make a decision that would determine his future actions and his place in this world. Sitting across from the witness who was recounting what had happened, Jacob felt his emotions fluctuate between rage and sadness. He was stunned by what he learned, but at the same time realized that he now had the key to solving the mystery of his father's death. After many hours of talking and figuring things out, Jacob realized that the truth about his father's death was much more complex than he could have imagined. His father was caught in a web of intrigue and shady deals that ultimately led to his death. But most importantly, he learned the name of the man behind it all, the powerful boss of the local criminal network, Ryan Smith. Realizing that he now had the opportunity to seek justice, Jacob decided that the time had come to act. He knew he had to act carefully and tactfully to bring justice without putting himself and his family in danger. With all his strength and determination, Jacob came up with a plan to put pressure on Ryan Smith and bring about his downfall. He used his gang connections to plot an attack on Smith's property and disrupt his business operations. Thus, Jacob entered into a dangerous game where his own life and the life of his family were at stake. But he was ready to do anything to get justice for his father and put an end to this dark chapter of his life forever. Jacob's plan was incredibly complex and risky, but he had no time for hesitation or doubt. He knew that it was now or never. It was time to strike back and expose whoever was behind the murder of his father. At first, Jacob carefully developed a strategy, carefully weighing each step. He then activated his gang connections, gathering a small but dedicated team ready to carry out his plan. They began to act covertly so as not to attract the attention of the police or enemy gangs. The first step of the plan was to weaken Ryan Smith's position by creating difficulties in his business. Jacob and his team attacked warehouses and retail outlets belonging to the boss, causing significant damage to his operations. This forced Smith to make contact, which was exactly what Jacob expected. The next stage of the plan was more daring. Jacob decided to draw public attention to Smith's activities so that the pressure on him would become even greater. He staged a series of information leaks and scandalous revelations that caused a wave of indignation in society and attracted media attention. But the most decisive moment came when Jacob decided to confront Ryan Smith personally. He arranged a meeting with his boss, where he showed him evidence of his crimes and demanded justice for his father's death. At that moment, Jacob realized that his decision would change everything. As Jacob stood in front of Ryan Smith, the tension in the room became more palpable. The two men's eyes met in a merciless confrontation filled with anger and determination. Smith tried to justify himself by making excuses and threats, but Jacob was unmoved. He presented the boss with convincing evidence of his crimes, including those related to the murder of his father. This was the moment of truth on which his life and the fate of his family stood. Smith was furious. He tried to intimidate Jacob by threatening him and his loved ones, but he did not allow himself to be intimidated. On the contrary, he continued to stand firm and demand justice. His determination and courage were unshakable, even in the face of such mortal danger. The moment Jacob stood in front of Ryan Smith, the tension grew. Smith, realizing his game was up, decided to take one last chance. He quickly pulled out his weapon, but Jacob was faster. Grabbing his revolver, Jacob began a rapid hand-to-hand confrontation with Smith. In this fight, where every step was imbued with rage and determination, Jacob used his training and experience to seize the weapon from his enemy. One moment of fatal error, and Jacob was able to snatch the gun from Smith's hands. The seconds felt like an eternity, but the moment Jacob took aim, his determination was absolute. With a wave of his soul, he pulled the trigger, and the shot rang out in the silence of the room. Ryan Smith fell to the floor, his eyes remaining open, filled with horror and surprise before their light faded. Jacob remained standing, clutching the revolver in his hand, mixed feelings filling his heart. Relief, sadness, but also a sense of completion. Hearing the sounds of gunfire, neighbors anxiously dialed the police number. The ambulance and police arrived within minutes of the incident. Jacob realized that he was now in a dangerous situation. He only had a few minutes to leave the crime scene before the police found him there. The sound of sirens approached with flashing beacons, and Jacob had to make a decision on the fly. He quickly assessed his capabilities and decided to hide in the attic, hoping that he would not be noticed. Hiding in the darkness, he prayed not to be found. The minutes dragged on like hours, and the sounds of police footsteps and voices grew closer. But finally, the noise began to fade away. The police left without finding Jacob. Relieved, Jacob came out of hiding and headed towards the exit. The police began a thorough investigation into what happened, but despite their best efforts, they could not find any evidence that could lead to the discovery of Ryan Smith's killer. Jacob, on the verge of panic, knew that time was working against him. He was in a constant state of tension, expecting that at any moment the police might discover evidence that would lead them to him. Mixed emotions raged inside him, relief at being free of Smith and fear at the possible consequences of his actions. Jacob knew he had to act quickly and decisively to avoid being targeted by the police. He began to carefully plan his escape, looking for ways to hide and start a new life in a safe place. Every day the tension grew, but Jacob was determined to continue to fight for his freedom and a new chance. He knew it was time for a bold move that would change everything. Realizing that he needed help, Jacob decided to form his own gang to protect himself and his loved ones, as well as find a way to evade the police. He began actively reaching out to his contacts, inviting them to join his business. It wasn't easy at first. Many of his friends and acquaintances were wary, fearing police attention and possible danger. But Jacob was convinced of his goal, and his determination began to infect others. Gradually, his gang began to form from those who shared his vision and were ready to help. These were people with different skills and abilities, from information technology experts to experienced streeters and fighters. Together, they became an invincible force. Every day, Jacob's gang became stronger and better organized. They created plans, exchanged information, and helped each other in the most difficult situations. Jacob realized that now he was not alone in his struggle, and this gave him strength and confidence. Gradually, Jacob's gang gained more and more control over the city's street areas. Jacob was determined in his quest to find a new life, free from fear and persecution, and he wanted his gang to be a reflection of himself. All the gang members were black, like him. This was not only a strategic decision to reduce the risk of detection, but also an expression of solidarity and unity. Jacob believed that only such a gang could achieve their goals and protect each other in the harsh world of street life. Together they became an unshakable force, acting in unity and coherence. Each member of the gang contributed with different skills and abilities, which made them invincible on the streets of the city. Their activities were subtle but influential. They defended their territories, helped those in need, and circumvented legal restrictions to ensure their survival. For Jacob, the gang became not just a group of like-minded people, but also a family that was always there in difficult moments. As Jacob's gang gained a foothold in the city, they began to look for new ways to make money and increase their influence. One of the options that came to Jacob and his gang's mind was to rob a furniture store. The idea was that furniture stores often stored large sums of money, as well as valuable items and goods that could be resold on the black market. In addition, such a robbery could serve as a demonstration of the gang's power and influence over other criminal groups in the city. Jacob called a gang meeting and presented his idea. He explained the plan of action, developed a strategy, and assigned roles to the gang members. Everyone was unanimous that this could be a successful heist, provided they acted carefully and in a coordinated manner. The furniture store robbery was planned for the night when the store was closed and there was minimal security. Jacob's gang carefully made their way inside, avoiding any guards or security systems. They quickly collected valuables and cash, leaving the crime scene before police could arrive. During the night when the city was plunged into darkness, Jacob's gang approached the furniture store they had chosen to rob. All gang members were trained and armed to the teeth. They knew that every second was important and that any mistake could result in disaster. Jacob, at the head of his team, developed a detailed plan. He assigned roles: who would break the doors, who would monitor the security, who would collect money and valuables. Everyone was serious and determined. First, the gang had to get inside the store. They used hacking skills to bypass security without drawing too much attention to themselves. Once they entered, the loot collection operation began. One group was engaged in collecting valuable items: furniture, household appliances, jewelry that could be resold. Another group was looking for cash that might have been kept in store safes or cash registers. Each gang member knew his role and performed it flawlessly. They worked quickly and efficiently but carefully so as not to attract the attention of the police. Their goal was clear: collect everything valuable and disappear, leaving behind only an empty store and complex puzzles for investigators. In the end, Jacob's gang was able to get away with the loot without attracting attention. They disappeared into the night, leaving behind only secret trails and the belief that the world of crime would always support them. Under the cover of darkness, Jacob's gang successfully infiltrated a furniture store, ready to commit a daring robbery. Inside the store, valuable items and money were waiting for them, which could provide them for some time in advance. Armed with tools and skilled burglary skills, the gang members infiltrated the store, bypassing security systems. They quickly split into groups to make the most of their time and resources. One group rushed to the stands with furniture and household appliances, taking out the most expensive and sought-after items from the store: sofas, armchairs, refrigerators, televisions. Everything that could bring good profit on the black market was collected and carried away. Another group focused on finding cash. They searched cash registers, safes, and other places where money could be kept. After a thorough inspection of the store, they discovered a large amount of cash that the store was holding to pay its suppliers. As a result of the robbery, Jacob's gang was able to steal furniture and household appliances worth more than several $100,000. They also discovered a significant amount of cash, adding up to even more. The next step was to ensure a safe and discreet disappearance to avoid police pursuit. Jacob's gang was able to complete the mission successfully, but they still had a lot of work to do to ensure their safety and keep their money. The situation became increasingly tense when Jacob's gang discovered that there were 23 hostages in the store. This is an unforeseen turn of events that added even more danger and responsibility to their shoulders. Jacob and his gang were at a dead end. They couldn't just let the hostages go without risking being caught. In this situation, Jacob made the difficult but decisive decision to shoot 2 of the hostages in order to demonstrate the seriousness of his intentions and force the others to follow his instructions. When police arrived at the scene, they were shocked by what they saw: a destroyed furniture store, the corpses of 2 hostages, and the rest were in a state of shock and fear. The officers were amazed at the brutality and ruthlessness of Jacob's gang. Police officers quickly began investigating and assisting the hostages. They had to collect witness statements, investigate the crime scene, and identify the dead. But the worst thing was that the police realized that they were dealing with a criminal group that was ready to do anything for its goals. The officers knew that they would have to use all their resources and experience to apprehend Jacob's gang. They knew that this would not be an easy task, given the cunning and determination of the criminals. With time running out, the police began to increase their presence in the city, hoping to find clues and leads that would lead them to Jacob's gang. They were prepared for a long and difficult fight against this brutal criminal group, and were determined to bring all those responsible to justice. Every day, the tension in the city only grew. Jacob's gang became the subject of an intense manhunt, with police sparing no effort to find them and bring them to justice for their crimes. For Jacob's gang, the situation became increasingly tense. They understood that they were on the brink of war with the police, and that every step they took could be treacherous. But they were determined in their desire to protect their interests and survive at any cost. However, the police were persistent and professional. They used all their resources and technology to track Jacob's gang and find clues that would lead them to them. Officers carried out extensive raids, searching homes, checking vehicles, and monitoring gang connections. Jacob's gang knew that time was against them. They were faced with a choice: stay and fight to the end, or leave the city and start a new life elsewhere. But even if they managed to leave, their past will always haunt them. Every day the situation became more tense, and the struggle for survival became more severe. In the end, Only time will tell who will emerge victorious in this dangerous game, Jacob's gang or the law. Under pressure from the police and feeling that he was running out of time, Jacob decided that he needed a new ambitious plan that would help him gather enough resources to leave the city for good and start a new life. He gathered his gang in a secret place where they could discuss their plans safely. Jacob announced that they were to carry out a bank robbery. It was a risky move, but he was confident that it was the only way to raise enough money for their plans. The bank was well protected, but Jacob had confidence in his team. He developed a detailed plan, and each member of the gang was assigned a role. They spent months observing and planning, studying the bank's layout, its security systems, and staff schedules. To rob the bank, Jacob developed a cunning and carefully thought-out plan. Here's what it might look like. Reconnaissance. Jacob's gang began with thorough reconnaissance. They studied the bank's location, studied the staff's work schedule, and determined when the bank would be most vulnerable. Team. Jacob assembled his team of the most reliable and experienced members. Each gang member got his own role: burglar, guard, driver, shooter, etc. Transport. They prepared a vehicle that would allow them to quickly leave the crime scene. It could be a stolen car or a specially prepared getaway bus. Weapons and uniforms. Each gang member was armed and protected. They used body armor, masks, and other means to hide their identities. Diversion. Jacob and his team create a diversion to divert the attention of the police and security to another part of the city while they carry out the heist. Quick action. When the moment came, they broke into the bank, quickly neutralized the guards and staff, took money from the cash registers and safes, and then quickly fled the scene. Safe hideout. After committing the robbery, they moved to a pre-prepared safe hideout where they could hide from the police and switch to a plan to escape the city. This plan was based on a high level of coordination, careful preparation, and well-done details, which allowed Jacob's gang to carry out the heist efficiently and without unnecessary losses. After a successful bank robbery, Jacob's gang retreated to their temporary hideout and began preparing to escape. Jacob knew that they had little time before the police discovered their trail, so every minute was worth its weight in gold. He gathered his team and announced the start of an operation to leave the city. They switched to alternative routes and used special vehicles to avoid roadblocks and public attention. While the police began intensive raids throughout the city, Jacob's gang slowly but surely moved on their way. They were vigilant and careful, knowing that one wrong step could be their last. As they left the city limits, the tension began to ease. Jacob's gang was relieved, realizing that they were able to successfully pull off the robbery and avoid arrest. Arriving in Chicago, Jacob's gang felt relieved from their persecution. The city was huge and full of opportunities, which created ideal conditions for a secretive existence. They took refuge in a quiet area of the city where they could remain undetected. Jacob and his gang began to build a new life under new names and fake documents. They avoided contact with local criminal groups so as not to attract attention to their person. Despite their success in evading the police, anxiety and uncertainty remained in the hearts of each gang member. They knew that at any moment the police could find traces of their criminal activities and deprive them of their freedom forever. However, they were willing to take risks to remain free. Chicago provided them with new opportunities and prospects. They began to rebuild their criminal empire, but now more carefully and prudently. They understood that, in this city, they could find their place in the sun, but only if they stayed one step ahead of the law and their pursuers. From the moment they arrived in Chicago, Jacob's gang decided to act as carefully and quietly as possible. They chose a shelter in a quiet suburb where strangers rarely visited and tried not to attract attention to themselves. The gang avoided major criminal operations and limited itself to petty thefts and fraud. They split into small groups and acted independently to reduce the risk of attracting attention. Despite this, Jacob and his gang never ceased to be on their guard. They knew that the police could find traces of their criminal activities at any moment and launch a raid. Therefore, each member of the gang was on constant guard, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. For a long time, the gang remained in the shadows, avoiding the attention of both the police and local criminal gangs. They understood that time was on their side, and gradually hoped that their criminal past would begin to be forgotten, and they would be able to live a normal life, safe from persecution. Over time, Jacob's gang began to gradually relax. They felt that the danger had passed and began to appear on the streets more and more often. However, Jacob remained cautious and reminded his subordinates not to relax and be careless. Despite bouts of relaxation, the gang continued to avoid major criminal operations to avoid attracting the attention of the police. Instead, they focused on petty theft, fraud, and other low-profile crimes. One day, when Jacob and his gang gathered to discuss their plans for the future, a gang of rivals burst into the room. It turned out that they learned about the location of Jacob's gang and decided to eliminate them in order to seize their territory and resources. A brutal firefight began. Jacob's gang was prepared, but they were outnumbered. They held on bravely, but with every minute the situation became more and more tense. In the end, through skillful tactics and determination, Jacob's gang managed to fend off their rivals, but the cost was high. Several gang members were wounded and one of them died. This incident serves as a reminder to Jacob's gang that danger lurks around every corner, and that they must remain vigilant and determined to survive in this dangerous world. After being attacked by a rival gang, Jacob realized that they were the target of not only the police, but also other criminal gangs who saw them as a serious competitor in drug trafficking and other criminal operations. He called his gang together for a serious conversation. Jacob admitted that the situation had become much more dangerous and that they needed to take action to protect and maintain their influence. The gang agreed that they needed to strengthen their position and be prepared for any possible threats. Jacob and his associates began to build new alliances with other gangs and increase their weapons and protection. They also increased intelligence and monitoring of their territories in order to be aware of all the actions of their competitors. The gang knew that they needed to be one step ahead of everyone else in order to survive in this dangerous game. For Jacob, this was an important lesson. He realized that in the world of crime there is no place for the weak, and that in order to survive they need to be prepared for any challenges and threats. He was determined to continue his fight and protect his gang at all costs. Realizing that they had become the target of other gangs, Jacob decided to investigate the situation and find those who were trying to eliminate him and his gang. He began an active investigation aimed at identifying hostile groups. First, he reached out to his contacts in the Chicago underworld, using his resources and influence to gain information on possible suspects. He developed a network of informants who could provide useful information about the activities of rival gangs. Jacob and his gang conducted many night raids, searching and collecting evidence. They studied the territories of other gangs, monitored their activities, and collected information about possible participants in the attack on their gang. Every day they got closer to the solution, and finally, through hard work and determination, they managed to find clues leading to the gang that was behind the attack on them. Jacob was ready for revenge. He and his gang devised a plan to punish their enemies and protect their territory from further threats. They were determined in their desire to protect their interests and show everyone that they were not to be trifled with. Having collected all the necessary information about the enemy gang, Jacob and his gang decided to act quickly and decisively. They developed a detailed plan to strike back and eliminate the threat forever. On the night of the next day, they went into enemy territory. Armed to the teeth and ready for battle, they infiltrated enemy territory, covering each other and acting tactically. The battle was brutal and bloody. Both sides fought for their lives and their territory. Several members of both gangs were wounded, but Jacob and his team held strong despite the odds. In the end, through discipline, coordination, and determination, Jacob's gang emerged victorious. They captured the leaders of the enemy gang and destroyed them, giving their gang the opportunity to strengthen their position and continue their criminal activities without danger from competitors. After this victory, Jacob's gang became even more respected and feared in the Chicago underworld. They showed everyone that they can not only defend themselves, but also respond to threats with strength and determination. After successfully fighting a rival gang, Jacob's gang became an unrivaled force in the Chicago crime world. Their name inspired fear and respect. Their influence covered every corner of the city. Jacob and his gang used their power to establish complete control over drug trafficking, smuggling, and other criminal operations in the city. They developed strong ties to local authorities and corrupt officials, allowing them to operate freely and with impunity. They ran their operations with a strong hand, allowing no competition and not tolerating disobedience. Those who dared to oppose them faced instant and merciless punishment. Meanwhile, Jacob's gang continued to expand their holdings, capturing new territories and increasing their income. They became an unstoppable force in the world of crime, not only in Chicago, but also beyond. For Jacob and his gang, it was a time of greatness and power. They knew that they had become the most powerful players in the underworld, and nothing could stop them in their quest for power and wealth. Every day, Jacob's gang became richer and more powerful, but with this growth came more and more enemies. Their success in drug trafficking, smuggling, and other criminal operations caused envy and jealousy among other criminal groups, who strongly opposed them. Jacob and his gang felt pressure from enemies who were trying to undermine their power and authority. They faced attacks, assassination attempts, and other acts of violence, but they remained strong and determined, ready to defend their interests at any cost. In response to the threats, they increased their security measures and launched their own operations to neutralize enemies. They formed alliances with other criminal groups to strengthen their positions and increase their power. However, despite their best efforts, Jacob's gang could not completely eliminate the threats. Enemies continued to stalk them at every turn, and every day was a test and challenge for Jacob and his gang. Despite all the difficulties, Jacob and his gang continued to fight and protect their interests, knowing that only the strongest and most determined will be able to survive in this dangerous and merciless world of crime. Realizing that their success was attracting more and more enemies, Jacob decided to go further and increase his income to strengthen his position in the underworld. He began to develop plans to rob banks, realizing that this could bring them even more money and power. Jacob invested a lot of time and resources into preparing for these robberies. He hired experienced professionals to help him develop detailed plans, and they carefully studied every aspect of the operation to minimize risks and increase the chances of success. Jacob's gang was ready for action. They trained, upgraded their skills, and collected all the necessary equipment and weapons to commit robberies. Jacob was determined to succeed, and nothing could stop him in his quest for wealth and power. However, they understood that the risk was very high. A bank robbery could attract even more attention from the police and other criminal groups, and they were ready for it. But they were determined and willing to risk everything to achieve their goals and strengthen their position in the world of crime. Jacob and his gang began meticulous preparations for the bank robbery, knowing that the success of the operation depended on every detail. Here's how they prepared. 1. Reconnaissance. The gang spent long weeks on reconnaissance, studying the location and environment of the target bank. They observed the flood of visitors and employees, analyzed security systems, and identified security weaknesses. 2. Preparing the plan. They developed a detailed action plan, defining the roles of each gang member. They took into account every step of the operation, from breaking security to escaping with the loot. 3. Training. The gang conducted intensive training to prepare for their roles in the operation. They practiced specific skills such as picking locks, handling weapons, and coordinating under stress. 4. Preparing equipment. They gathered all the necessary equipment to carry out the operation, including masks, suits, weapons, burglary tools, and vehicles. 5. Escape planning. They carefully planned their escape to avoid falling into the hands of the police. This included choosing the route, the time and place of the meeting, and how to destroy evidence. Jacob's gang was ready for action. They knew that success depended on their unity, discipline, and professionalism, and they were determined to achieve their goal despite all the risks and challenges. When the day of the robbery arrived, Jacob's gang acted with composure and the precision of a clock. They arrived at the bank at the predetermined time and began performing their roles as planned. Some of the gang, armed and wearing masks, stormed the bank, forcing employees and customers to lie down on the floor and not move. Others began breaking into safes and cash drawers, collecting valuables and money. At the same time, the gang members responsible for security kept the surrounding area under control, ensuring that there were no external threats and timely warning of a threat from the police. The operation continued in minutes that seemed like an eternity, but each member of the gang knew their role and carried it out with professionalism and determination. They soon gathered everything they could and were ready to escape. However, as soon as they tried to leave the bank, an unpleasant surprise awaited them in the face of the police, who had already arrived in response to the alarm. A chase ensued, and Jacob's gang was forced to use all their skills and resources to evade arrest and bring their loot to safety. And although the escape turned out to be much more difficult than they expected, Jacob's gang still managed to escape from the police with loot and without losses. This success only strengthened their position in the underworld and proved that they can handle any challenge that comes their way. After the successful bank robbery, Jacob's gang continued to strengthen their position in the underworld. They were at the height of their power and wealth, but this attracted even more attention from the police and other criminal groups. Jacob knew that they needed to act carefully and deliberately to avoid falling into the hands of the law and to prevent possible betrayals within and without their own gang. He began to expand his operations and influence to other cities and states, establishing new connections and alliances with other criminal groups. He also invested heavily in legitimate businesses to cover his criminal proceeds and provide protection for himself and his gang from prosecution by the authorities. But despite all their efforts, the enemies of Jacob's gang continued to pursue them, and every day was a test and challenge. Jacob knew that he and his gang remained a target for many, and that they needed to remain vigilant and determined to survive in this dangerous and merciless world of crime. He was ready to take any measures to protect his gang and his interests, and understood that only the strongest and most skillful would be able to survive in this struggle for power and wealth. When the police began an active investigation into the activities of Jacob's gang, they were able to obtain information from one of the former gang members, who decided to make a plea deal in exchange for testimony and protection. This man, known by the alias Shepherd, was an inside informant who was gathering evidence against his former associates. Thanks to Shepherd's detailed testimony, the police received information about the location and plans of Jacob's gang. They organized a sting operation to arrest part of the gang while they were in one of their secret hideouts. The police suddenly invaded the gang's hideout, leaving them with no chance of escape. Some of the gang members were arrested on the spot, while others tried to resist, but were quickly subdued and detained. However, Jacob and some of his most trusted men managed to evade arrest due to their quick reactions and knowledge of secret passages. This was a serious blow to Jacob's gang, weakening their influence and opportunities for further criminal activities. However, the rest of the gang was determined in their quest to protect their leader and resume their activities, promising even more tension and drama in the fight against the law. After the arrest of half of Jacob's gang, the police began active investigations and raids on the remaining participants. Jacob realized that his gang was under enormous pressure, and he had to take drastic measures to maintain his power and protect his remaining brothers in arms. In response to the police, Jacob began developing new tactics and strategies to evade law enforcement. He established strict security measures around his gang and increased the level of paranoia among his members to prevent betrayal. At the same time, he intensified his connections in the criminal world, establishing new alliances and exchanging information with other gangs. He understood that only by uniting and acting together could they withstand the powerful force of law enforcement. However, despite their best efforts, the police continued to strike at Jacob's gang, detaining their members and exposing their criminal operations. Jacob knew that time was against him, and that they needed to act quickly and decisively to maintain their power and protect their people. Thus began a new chapter in the struggle for power and survival in the world of crime, where every step was decisive, and every decision could determine the fate of not only Jacob, but also his gang. After part of Jacob's gang was arrested, their honor and loyalty were put to the test. They ended up in prison, but not one of them ratted out their comrades. For them, honor and loyalty were fundamental values, and they were ready to do anything to preserve their gang and their leader. In prison, they became even closer, discovering new levels of trust and mutual assistance. They supported each other, shared information, and made plans for the future. They knew they were being targeted by law enforcement, but they were willing to fight to the end to defend their honor and their gang. Jacob, while free, continued to fight for his imprisoned brothers, using his connections and resources to provide them with protection and support from the outside. He knew that they were his strong and reliable allies, and that he must do everything possible to return them to freedom and revive his gang. Meanwhile, the police continued to strike at Jacob's gang, but his brothers in prison remained a stone wall despite all the trials. Their honor and loyalty were unwavering, and they were willing to do anything for their leader and their gang. The police were able to track down the rest of Jacob's gang using a wide range of information sources and intelligence networks. They established surveillance and control over strategic points where gang members could be located and carefully monitored their movements. One day, when the bandits were about to commit their next criminal operation, the police organized a special operation to detain them. They invaded the gang's hideout in a coordinated manner, giving them no chance of escape. The sequence of the surprise attack made the strike as effective as possible. The fight was brutal and bloody, but the police ultimately outnumbered the bandits with their professionalism and numerical superiority. Most of the gang members were arrested on the spot and their weapons and loot were confiscated. However, despite his best efforts, Jacob managed to evade arrest thanks to his clever escape plan, which he prepared in advance. The remaining gang members were taken into custody and awaiting trial. This was a serious blow to Jacob's gang, which weakened their influence and opportunities for further criminal activities. Now, they had to gather again and be reborn from the ashes to continue the struggle for power and survival in this dangerous world of crime. When the police struck Jacob's gang, arresting their members at the border, Jacob realized that he was now in a very serious situation. He was the only member of the gang who remained at large, and now he had to act quickly and carefully to avoid falling into the hands of justice. He decided to hide in Philadelphia, where he previously lived, in the hope of finding temporary refuge and thinking about how to proceed. Returning to a familiar environment seemed his best option to avoid police persecution and maintain his freedom. But Philadelphia turned out to be an unpredictable and dangerous place, especially for a man on the wanted list. Jacob had to hide and move around the city, constantly changing locations and identities to avoid detection. He knew that his former accomplices were facing serious charges in prison and that he could not count on help from them. Now he had to survive alone, whose enemy was the entire law and police agents, and whose allies were only shadows of his former power and wealth. Jacob found himself in a difficult situation and had to turn to his criminal drug friend for help and cover. This friend, known as Ryan, was a longtime ally and partner in various criminal operations. Ryan was an intelligent and cunning man who had connections in the underground world and was well aware of techniques for evading arrest and hiding from law enforcement. He offered his friend Jacob temporary refuge in his secret hideout, which was located in the slums of Philadelphia. Living in Ryan's hideout made Jacob feel relatively safe, but he knew it was only a temporary solution. He needed a plan of action to regain his power and revive his gang, but to do this he would have to take risks and act boldly. Ryan and Jacob spent their days discussing possible courses of action and strategies to rebuild the gang and get out of their difficult situation. Together, they planned their next steps, knowing that each of them must be careful and prepared for any challenges they would face. While Jacob hid in the secret hideout of his criminal friend Ryan, his enemies and competitors sought to destroy him to eliminate his main rival in the world of crime. One day, as Jacob emerged from hiding to meet one of his trusted allies, his enemies struck. They waylaid him while he was alone and attacked with unexpected ferocity and determination. Although Jacob was well-trained and armed, the numerical superiority and strategic planning of his enemies proved too strong. During the shootout, Jacob was seriously wounded but managed to retaliate. However, when it was all over, Jacob found himself defenseless against his opponents. They approached him, and at the last moment, as he lay on the ground, they struck a fatal blow. Thus ended the life of Jacob, one of the most powerful and influential criminals in the world. His death was a major blow to his gang and left the underworld in a state of uncertainty and chaos. But his legacy lived on, inspiring both his allies and his enemies, and his name remained famous in criminal circles for many years to come. Jacob's death shocked the criminal world. His allies were stunned and deeply saddened at the loss of their leader and friend. His enemies felt temporary relief, but knew that the struggle for power in the underworld would continue and that new leaders would emerge in place of the departed. The police and law enforcement agencies were also determined to strengthen the fight against crime, and Jacob's death was a victory for them in this fight. However, they knew that new criminal leaders would soon fill the gap left by the departed, and that the struggle for control of the streets would continue. For those who remained true to Jacob's ideals, his death became a source of renewed motivation and determination. They were ready to continue his work and protect his legacy from enemies and traitors. Thus ended the story of Jacob, a criminal mastermind whose name will be remembered as a symbol of power, wealth, and determination. His death marked the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter in the struggle for control of the streets and hearts of the people.